How did Victorian women deal with their periods? This was a question I was asked in the comments for the past 12 months at least, also known as a year. And the reason I didn't answer that question is because I wasn't sure I knew the answer in the first place. Like, I had a vague idea of what happened in the 19th century where it comes to that thing, but I also wasn't sure if that was the only solution or if I was making something up or if it was a myth that was then repeated until it became a stereotype. I had no clue. So I did some further research and now I feel competent enough to let you know what happened in 19th century when you were a woman and you had your period. First of all, let me just say it's that area of life that is almost impossible to research. Like, I had no idea how difficult that would be. I mean, I had an idea because I've been reading 19th century novels a lot and it never even came up, but that was kind of understandable. Like, you never have period talk in Bronte or Gaskell or, you know, any other Victorian novel. Then I realized not even in the most realistic, naturalistic 19th century novels have I ever stumbled upon a description of a woman's period or a mention that, oh, she has her period. So then I thought, you know, maybe diaries might have a mention of that, but I kind of already knew that that was not gonna happen because diaries and journals from the era were sort of like memorials of a person. Like, you realized that they might be read by your ancestors at some point. So even when you wrote about, let's say, your romantic adventures, you wouldn't be very graphic with it and you wouldn't really be super honest. Most of the diaries that were written in the 19th century are something of a, I woke up, a very pleasant day indeed, John visited, we had lunch. And that does not give you a very great perspective of what daily life, daily struggles were like. So I kind of knew that that's not gonna happen and I had to look at the diaries and obviously I didn't find anything, like not a mention of periods. The only source that does mention women's period at the time is medical articles. So in 19th century, men were gradually more interested in women's periods as a sort of a medical abnormality. They started examining it more. They were like, what the hell is going on? Because up to this point they kind of thought it's a disease or something's wrong or this is just something that makes women crazy, and they didn't really know much about it. They didn't feel the need to research it, but with the growth of medicine in the second part of the 19th century, they were gradually more interested. So like all of the articles I found were mostly medical articles. So in those articles, some of them had a description of how women dealt with their periods, and that's legit one of the only sources I had. The other source was ads for stuff that was used by women. Though most of the methods were kind of homemade, you could also buy ready-made solutions, and those solutions had ads. So ads for stuff like that were also useful in kind of imagining what it looked like. And the other thing is memories of people that got their periods before 1920s, because in 1920s it was kind of a modernized way of dealing with it. Sanitary pads and tampons were used by some. So women that got their periods before 1920 and they were interviewed by some other women also gave testimonies about how they dealt with that. So an important thing to note is that throughout the Victorian era you would not wear underwear as we know it now. You would not have a piece of clothing that wrapped around your you would have drawers, and drawers or pantaloons or whatever you want to call it had an open crotch. So this is something to note when it comes to 19th century period. How women peed, they just dragged their skirts up and they just did it because their drawers were crotchless. So they didn't have to like take them down or anything. Why is it important? Because the most popular way of dealing with period was basically a piece of cloth or like a sort of like a diaper that you would attach to a belt. So you would have a belt that had either buttons or ties or something that was just there to attach the diaper, the cloth. And then you would have a piece of cloth that you had to fold, etc., and then attach it to the belt. So basically you had like something of a sanitary pad, except you didn't attach it to the underwear because there wasn't anything to attach it to. So you needed a belt for that. And that sort of solution was called a T-bandage because of the T shape that it had. So obviously that wasn't the most comfortable thing ever. You had to basically fold it, give it the right shape, put it in there, and then you had to change it, wash it, soak it, put somewhere so no one could see it, so it could dry. And then you also had a problem of how the hell do you pee in that? Because as I mentioned, there wasn't anything there, so you could just pee how much the hell you wanted without having to undo your underwear. But with the sanitary towel sort of thing, how did you do that? So that was also an issue. Some women had a piece of sheep wool or like a raw cotton cloth wrapped in something that they used the same way we use tampons nowadays. As you can imagine, that also wasn't the most comfortable thing. I've also read that some women that had very like light periods, they wouldn't use anything. They would just allow it to like flow. And it only worked if your period was really light, because otherwise obviously your ankles and shoes or whatever petticoats would be all messed up. But some women apparently did that. Now what is interesting is that when you read the medical articles, they're always like,
women on period are unfit to work or have any physical activity, so they should basically just rest, lay on a sofa, and just wait till it's done.
But the reality was completely different because obviously working women did not have that luxury of just laying around on a sofa. And I'm pretty sure that most of the women that could afford laying on a sofa didn't do that anyway, because they had stuff to do. They had to run the house, they had to order their servants around, the dinner done for the guests. Like, imagine you have a like dinner party at 7 and at 6 you have cramps. You're gonna make it to that freaking dinner party and make sure everybody's having a good time. Women were just being women, meaning they know their duty and they're not gonna just lay around. They have stuff to do and they have important stuff to do. I think most of the time, especially if your period was not that bad, you would still be super active and do all the stuff you need to do. And also, it's never mentioned in the diaries that, oh, I had to lay for 4 days, which I guess is something that you would write down. Even if you didn't mention the period thing, you would just go like, I just had to spend 3 days in bed. That never happens in the diaries either. Like, you're not like, oh, I'm very unwell every month. You don't get that diary entry. So I guess that also tells us that that was not a very common practice to just like miss that couple of days in the month just because you can. But it is true that it was a very taboo topic, and also medicine did not know anything about what's going on. Like, blood coming out of you is a very scary thing, and I guess if you don't know the reason, you can freak out. And I think men especially freaked out about it. They were just like, well, we don't know what's going on, so we better find a good explanation. And that explanation was usually that, you know, it's a disease, it's unhealthy to do anything if you have it, it's better to just like wait through it. But that, you know, their opinion doesn't mean that women listen to them and literally just laid around. Can you imagine that? Like, you're walking into a house and like all of the women are just like, oh, I'm just waiting till my period is over. That's kind of what I'm doing every month. So it's obviously a very secretive topic in a way. Like, I feel like there are many more solutions that women used that are kind of gone and no one knows about. Obviously it's not something that was discussed very often in the family, and maybe that's why it's so hard to actually dig up, you know, all the solutions and what was going on, because it was not only taboo in the public but also in private. Like, it wasn't a topic that you would want to talk about. So if you have any family stories about your grandmas using some funny solutions, let me know, because that's all interesting. It also depended on the country, obviously. I don't think the belts that were supposed to help you attach the sanitary towel were available everywhere, so obviously there must have been some other solutions. But that's all quite interesting, and you know, it's a topic I still don't know much about, but that's not the first thing that comes up when I think 19th century research. So that's what they did. And now I need a snack.